Well, hello, folks. I'm a little bit nervous about today's show because normally I'm wingman to a historian who is presenting the information, but today I am presenting my own story, which means I haven't got anybody to rely on, which is interesting. And I'm a bit out of practice telling this story. When I was guiding frequently, I'd be telling it 2 or 3 times a week inside the church in Angoville-au-Plain. I haven't told it for a year and a half or something. And of course, I'm using footage and maps and different illustrations today. So I'm a little bit nervous about today's one. So I'm going to get the shameless plug out of the way first. I know some of you watching have already got a copy of my book, Angels of Mercy. I did call it volume 1 of a series of books. I haven't done volume 2 yet. It was written 2013, bit different part of my life then. And But the link is in the description below how you can find it. It's on Amazon, and I'm very grateful for people who buy it and appreciate it. It was a sort of labor of love, really. So that's the shameless plug done. So a little bit of background about how I came to kind of discover the story. That sounds like I found it. It wasn't me who found it, and how it's changed over the years, indeed, since I did the book. Then I'll get into the presentation. So I began touring in Normandy 2002. I set up a company called Battle Bus. I had various guides working for me. We did the standard, Sam Merrigley's Utah Beach, Pointe du Hoc, Omaha Beach, American Cemetery tour. And we were looking for other stops to do that would tell stories of individuals. And this is about the time that the story of Angoville-au-Plain, the church that we're going to be talking about today, started becoming a little bit more well known within the kind of the expert circles, because the association in the village had set a monument up in 2002. I think the first stained glass window, went in 2004. And Dale Booth, who was one of my staff then and now is probably Normandy's most successful tour guide, Dale Booth Tours, was the one who started kind of popping into the village and telling the story there. And I started going and telling the story. So too did Sean Claxton and various other members of my team. And we decided we wanted to kind of dig into this story and find out more about it. There was a little pamphlet the church provided that they still do that told a very basic version of the story. And long story short, over the next few years, I got to know both of the medics. I got to know other historians who'd written about it. And I put together this story that I'm going to tell you about today. But for those who have got the book, I'm going to expand on some of the stuff in the book, tell you some stories I didn't put in the book, tell you things that perhaps I've learned since the book. And I'll particularly, one of the things I didn't feel came across particularly well in the book was the who holds which bit of the village in terms of the Germans and Americans and where they were. So I've got some Google Earth images I'm going to be using today to try, I think will hopefully make a bit more sense of exactly who is in the village and at what point and when things change, and some of the stories you'll know before. So that's what we're going to be doing today. I appreciate your questions coming in, and we'll go from there. So I've got my PowerPoint presentation and the footage. We were going to do this show live, folks, but when we went up there on our recce 3 days ago, the phone signal in the church is terrible. And in some places in the village, there was no signal at all. So I decided to take high definition footage and use that today. So this footage was taken last week, so it's nearly live, just not quite live. So let's start with what the purpose of the drop zone, closest drop zone was. So we're talking about the village of Angoville-au-Plain, which isn't actually marked on this village, on this map, but it's just south of Vierville. You can see Vierville there. If you haven't seen the show about Vierville on June the 7th with Joe, go back and watch that on World War II TV about the World War II TV about the taking of that village on June the 7th with the tanks coming in, the death of Benjamin Stoney, who was a Native American. That's a good story. Go back and watch that one. But Drop Zone D is the southernmost drop zone for the 101st Airborne. The furthest north isn't on this map. I cropped the map to just show the area we're talking about. Furthest north is Drop Zone A. That's the 50 Deuce. They're landing inland of causeways 3 and 4 to secure the movement off the beach. Drop Zone C is the middle one. That's where people like Dick Winters are supposed to land, E Company 506, and their job is essentially holding Saint Marie de Mont and holding causeways 2 and 1 off Utah Beach. The 82nd, of course, are further west. They're over near San Wrigley's and north. But Drop Zone D was for many years the least written about, I think, of the drop zones, because it's not got that obvious kind of objective that some of the other drop zones have. There's no key bridge. There's not these causeways through the floods. What the Americans who are doing on there, and it's 2 battalions of the 501st Parachute Infantry Regiment and 1 of the 506th, along with elements of the 326th Airborne Engineers. They have several jobs. One is basically kill the Germans that are there and keep that area clear of Germans. Secondly, they're moving down towards the Barquette locks, the 501st, which is the locks the Germans had closed to create the flooding that you've read about in all the books. There's also 2 bridges, the wooden bridges, the 3rd Battalion 506 are taking them, and also the potential of a German counterattack coming kind of this way from east of Carenton across towards the Utah beachhead. They've also got to secure part of the D913 road that runs from Utah Beach through to Carenton, and they've also got to try and seize Saint-Côme-de-Mont. So a lot on their plate there. Now, the drop zone itself. The Allies had misunderstood exactly how much of Normandy was underwater on D-Day. Some books say the Allies did not know that part of Normandy was underwater, and some say they knew about everything. The truth is somewhere in between the two. They had identified areas of flooded, this blue hashed areas here. These are based on Allied maps. They identified this here, but if you notice, they hadn't really picked up that this area here was underwater. I'm going to use a German map now. This map isn't in my book. I've acquired this map since I did the book. You can see the German details at the top there, but I'm going to blow it up on the section that we're talking about. So there's Vierville, there's Angoville-au-Plain, and here's the area with all the blue lines across it that, in fact, was pretty much underwater on D-Day. Now, when I say underwater, the water may not have been terribly deep, but the problem was often the grass was growing up through the water, grass and reeds. So the aerial photos the Allies were taking, remember we did our show about aerial photos with Alex back in early June. Alex Burnham was telling us about the importance of reconnaissance photos. The problem with photos is if the grass is carried on growing up through the floods, it still looks like a field. You need enough clear water to be able to show up as in the aerial photo as being flood. So although we knew there was some of this area was underwater, we didn't know the extent of it. Now, the road or the track I want to draw your attention to, and it's rather like yesterday's talk with Neil Sherry, I'm doing kind of the boring, getting it out of the way stuff first, then we'll get into kind of cool personal stories later on. There's Angoville-au-Plain. It's this road here that's important. I say road, it's a track basically, but it runs right into the heart of the drop zone. So sticks and sticks of the 501st, 326th Airborne Engineers, 506th and other units came down in the water. And if you're a paratrooper in the middle of the night, pitch black, okay, there's a full moon, but the full moon doesn't count for much on D-Day because of the fog and the cloud. You're going to try and aim for some kind of high ground, some kind of route out of it. And this little track kind of was just above the water. So if you had landed anywhere near here and you could kind of wade across, this is your primary route getting out that flood. Now, if you landed to the south down here, so just only a few hundred yards away, you'd end up with Johnson's force at the Barquette locks, which could be a separate subject for a separate day. But I really want you to draw your attention to this little road here, because that's where the majority of men who ended up fighting Angoville-au-Plain came from, out of the floods there, up this track here. So that's that. Pre-D-Day, the 501st were commanded by Colonel Howard Jumpy Johnson, a failed U.S. Navy pilot. He'd gone through Annapolis, but his eyesight wasn't good enough, ended up in the parachute, fledgling parachute units in the USA. Amazing soldier. This is taken on June the 5th at the Airfield of England. Colonel Johnson allegedly, and I have no reason to disbelieve it, shook the hands of every single man in the 501st as they went past to wish them well before they boarded the aircraft. And this is one of our heroes today. This is Private Kenneth J. Moore, 6'2", from Sonoma County, California, who are referring to as a medic in this story, but actually only had 2 weeks training and was really a kind of a stretcher bearer who became a medic because needs must. And Ken Moore said that by the time he got to Howard Johnson's handshake was mush. He said his hand had just completely lost all its strength. And there's a great story about Johnson landing on D-Day, because in his training when they were in the USA, Johnson was a real knife user. He had these all different types of throwing knives and fighting knives. He had a target set up in his office One side was Tojo, emperor, and the Japanese leader, and the other side was Hitler. And he would just spend hours thwacking his knife into this target, whichever way round was facing the office, and his staff in the other room typing away orders would hear him throwing this knife again, again, again. And Howard Johnson ended up coming down. I'll show you where he came down, actually. He came down kind of over here, just very close to where he was supposed to be, in fact. And he landed near a chateau called Chateau Bellineau. And there's slightly different versions of the story, but basically there was a German sentry walking around in the field below him as he's descending. And as Howard Johnson kind of lands, he immediately pulls out the knife and throws it. And some people say it was like a 20-foot throw, and he went straight in the back of this German's neck and killed the German. So a colonel in the parachute troops killed German within a second of landing. So that's Colonel Johnson. Yeah, you're right. He became a pilot eventually, but he didn't have good enough eyesight to become a Navy pilot. That's the thing. That's how he ended up in the airborne. So Johnson was an incredible soldier, and we won't be talking about him again today, but he's the commanding officer of 501st, and I thought it'd be only fair to mention him. This is footage, first bit of footage for you folks. So this is footage I took 2 days ago of Drop Zone D. Now, you'll see on the information panel there, the French call it La Zone Maudite. Now, that means the cursed zone. Kind of a macabre name for this drop zone. Now, why is it called the cursed zone? Couple of reasons. One is it was underwater, so this is where a few paratroopers drowned. Not as many as the books say, by the way. Some books say hundreds of paratroopers drowned. We think it's about 20, 25 paratroopers of the 101st and 82nd drowned, which out of 13,000 isn't very many. All this footage, by the way, I took this a couple of years ago in the winter floods, giving a much better idea of what this would have been like. You see how there, you can see, folks, the grass is growing up through the floods. Okay, not very high there, but you can imagine how in the wrong situation with an aerial photo, that's going to look like a regular field, because it's just a couple of feet deep. So as I took this footage a few years ago in the winter floods, another bit of footage there. This isn't actually Drop Zone D, but it gives you a really good idea of what this would have looked like at the time these men land in it, okay? So the cursed zone, one is because it was flooded and people drowned. Secondly, it was one of the last drop zones to jump. The 101st had been jumping on drop zone Z for a good 45 minutes, hour before they came here. And there are anti-aircraft guns near Carenton that were blazing, various C-47s as they flew over, got hit as they flew over, a couple crashed nearby. So the locals saw aircraft flying over, burning. And there was famously near Penem, which you just saw on the map there was a barn on fire. And the barn caused problems for pilots. And anyway, this name of the cursed zone, La Zone Maudite, became established, and it's still referred to it today, or the drop zone of murder, I've heard as well. Now, this is interesting. This little clip there, that over there, not the fence post, that hedge line at the back there is about where Kenneth J. More landed. Kenneth More landed over here. And being 6'2", he's a bit easier at some guys than others at landing in the water, because if you're 5'1", like Robert Wright was, who we'll come up to later, you're dealing with a lot more of a problem landing in water than if you're 6'2". Now, Ken's problem, and this is really exciting, interesting, and if you've read the book, you know this already. Ken was coming over in a C-47 known as Round Trip, and it was piloted by Lloyd Neblett. And as it was coming over, Ed Allworth, the 2nd Battalion 501st Adjutant, was on board. The jump master, Lieutenant Bert Collier, was on board. Ken Moore was on board, but it took horrendous gunfire from the German flat positions. And a 5-foot section of the right wing was knocked off. And so it starts behaving really badly in the sky. It may have even at this point crashed if the pilot hadn't been able to make control of it. So these guys are just jumping out, or the aircraft's going to go down. And once the men had jumped out, the aircraft, being lighter, found it was a bit easier to maneuver, and the pilot was able to get it back to England mercifully. But Ken found himself landing in this area, the other side of the field over there. Now, Ken had a leg bag. You've all heard about the leg bags in Band of Brothers. Nothing wrong with the design of the bag. It's just the fact is, it was thrust upon these American paratroopers too soon to D-Day. They hadn't got time to adapt to using it. But in Ken's leg bag, I'm pausing the video there, was plasma. And because he's landing in water, and the weight of the water is pulling him down, there's a wind blowing across it, kind of pulling him through there. He had to make a very quick decision whether to cut away the leg bag and save himself from drowning, or try and keep this leg bag of plasma he might need later. Now, he made the decision to cut away the leg bag. He did spend a few seconds trying to find it in the water there, but didn't do it. And don't forget, there's aircraft flying overhead, there's machine gun fire, there's flak guns, there's gunfire you can hear around him. He decided not to go back and look for this plasma. Now, later on, he wished he'd recovered that plasma. Now, I want to point out, we talked about this with Neil Cherry last night. These medics, and Ken More is really just a stretcher bearer, are meant to be setting up alongside proper regimental surgeons, doctors, people who are properly trained. They're not really meant to be on their own treating injuries. If they do, it's just first aid. You just put a bandage on, and then the man who's taken somewhere else where proper surgically trained people can treat him, because there was going to be a hospital set up. Indeed, there was a hospital set up by the 101st Airborne near Hiesville, near San Marie de More, where lots of operations set up. So, but at this point, Ken More is going to assume that he's going to end up working as an assistant to a proper surgeon. He doesn't know yet that he and his opposite number, Robert Wright, are going to be in a church with about 80 wounded men to try and save. So that's why at this point now, he's not that worried about losing the plasma. I want to point out in the background there, the high ground. Now, when I say high ground, we're not talking the Rocky Mountains. We're not talking a massive range. We're just talking maybe 20 meters above sea level. But there you are. Imagine, folks, you're a paratrooper in the half moonlight there. You're in water. Well, moved on a bit there. And you can see that high ground. Oh, where is it gone again? There. That's your objective. Move up. But how do you get there? You got to go up a track. But those buildings over there on the horizon, that's Haute-Adville. We'll be coming up and talking about them in a minute. I'll carry on playing again. And I will apologize, folks. I will go back and forth in the story at various points, try and keep up with the timeline, and try and keep up with the fact that my brain will go a bit fuzzy at various points, try and remember all this stuff. But this is the drop zone. That's the direction of La Barquette, where Johnson was, but pretty much all these fields have been at least underwater by 3 or 4 foot, or at least 6 inches of water. And there is the church tower over there in horizon as well. So that's that footage there. Boom. Right. Here is our arena that we're going to be talking about today. Now, I have rotated north a little bit. Look in the corner there. You can see I've actually moved north round a little bit to fit everything in. So we have the village of Angoville-au-Plain. We have Beaumont, which is a little hamlet that's part of Angoville-au-Plain. The D913 road that goes from Utah Beach all the way to Carenton. Les Drury, a big farm used by the Germans. Haute-Adville, the village. Delaunay Farm, an important location that will come in later on. The Chasse des Prels, which is a sunken track that ran its way between this part of Haute-Adville and Angoville-au-Plain over there. So this is the arena we're talking about. And by the way, I'm in the middle of talking. When I have a guest on, it means I can put my eyes on your comments a bit more often, because I'm talking all the time. I might miss some of your comments. If I do apologize, but I'm doing my best here. As I say, solo performance today. This is I'll show you, just go back again. This track here, there's one that runs on the bottom here. So it kind of runs east-west, although so the map's rotated a bit. And it's called Chasse Traverse, so just a sunken lane. Now, this is near where Ken landed. I'll show the video for you. So those who have read the book, now you're seeing the actual locations. Those of you who've never been to Normandy or won't be getting back to Normandy soon, you can see what these places look like. And, of course, I took this footage in June, so the foliage would have been the same. This track would have been exactly the same back then, except on the left of the hedgerow would have been underwater. Now, as we're facing towards Haute-Adville now, Ken More landed somewhere over to the left. And then I think there's a bit in the video when I get to the someone just asked what they missed the beginning. The video, all these videos stay on YouTube indefinitely, so you can go back and watch it again later. They all stay there. So Ken landed over to the left there somewhere. I'm just showing you through their field that shows again the kind of ground is rising up a little bit towards Angoville-au-Plain. And these are these small fields with the hedgerows that you're aware of when you see the films about Normandy. Okay, so there's just some footage there, and it looks quite good in the high definition like that. So that's quite good. I'm going to take a breath now. Right, we're going to talk about where the wounded came from before we actually address the fighting in the church, or the treatment of wounded in the church, I want to talk about where the wounded were gathered from and explain a bit more about that. So in Haute-Adville and at Les Drury Farm. So another Google Earth image. This time north is the correct way around. So there's Chasse-des-Prels I mentioned. There's the Loney Farm. There's the D913 that runs from Utah Beach that way down to Carenton-les Drury. Now this area all around here had been occupied since about May 1944 by a Georgian, that's what the locals said, Ost Battalion 795. So part of the German Defense Division, but these are Russian-speaking troops because they're from Georgia with German officers and German NCOs. Then further away in Carenton is Major von der Heydt's 6th Fallschirmjäger Regiment. So the Fallschirmjäger and the Georgians are going to be our two enemy forces that we're going to be talking about today. And this is where the majority of the fighting took place, where the wounded came from. So Angoville is up the track there to Chasse-des-Prels. So when we get to a bit of action, I'll be showing you photos that I will then reference those people in the bits I talk about later on. I hope you're enjoying it so far. So Leo Gillis, I'll be talking about. He was a sergeant, F Company 501st. Lieutenant Quincy Cougar, haven't got a photo of him, but there's his grave. He actually died on June the 6th, 1944, buried in the States. And there's Private Kenneth More, who we've been talking about, the 6'2", stretcher bearer, kind of medic. I'll call him a medic, but he's actually not a fully trained medic. Right, I'll take a breath. So here is some footage again from 2 days. This is the Loney Farm, and I'll pause the video when I need to and to talk about things. Okay, and there's my trusty blue van there. There's Mag there getting out of the way of the shot. She's just going to get out of the way now. So this is the Loney Farm, owned by a British chap, Richard Cooper, and his French wife, Caroline. They run bed and breakfast there. Great place to stay. I think they've got a Facebook page. Okay, so and there's a plaque on this farm to Lieutenant George Schmidt of E Company 501st, who I will be talking about in a few minutes' time. It's a wonderful plaque there, and it's one of those ones you've got to go off. You're not going to find this by accident. You've got to have to have driven to Haute-Adville because you want to see Haute-Adville. Now, this is going into Haute-Adville from the Loney Farm. Now, the field to the right, which you'll see in a minute, was where the Georgians were used. They had tents there. They had camouflaged awnings and stuff under tree lines. There's various vehicles there. And they are using Les Drury Farm. So thanks for saying it's excellent, Paul, because I'm feeling my brain is about to explode with all the stuff. Now, for those of you who've read Don Burgett's Courier Here, Screaming Eel and Normandy, I'm going to be telling you a story about this in a minute because there's a really good story that happened in this lane here as well. And that's looking now north towards the D913. So again, I took this footage 2 days ago, folks. So this was basically where we're looking now was the German positions, and the American positions are behind the camera now. So Ospertan 795. Now, as I head into Haute-Adville, and I'll tell you the story from Don Burgett's book in a minute, you'll see me coming up. So take a sip of water. Are you enjoying it so far, folks? Right. Now, there's a track coming in to the left in a minute when we get down there, and this track runs parallel to Chasse-aux-Prels, and it's called Chasse Travers, and it ran again kind of into the drop zone, and some Americans arrived in this village from a track there. Some arrived in Angoville from the track I mentioned. Now, this is where we're coming up to a place that Mark Bando, the Detroit-based American author who's written lots of books about the 101st, I'll pause it there, calls this area Gillis Corner, after Leo Gillis of F Company 501st, a sergeant who he got to know very well. In fact, when Mark Bando does parachuting, he still does, he's in his 60s, he wears Leo Gillis's dog tags. That's how close he is to Leo Gillis. Now, at some point on D-Day, I'll just keep on playing. It's just a little field now, but that was a kind of a, whoops, didn't mean to do that. That leads you to the drop zone. That is Chasse Travers. That leads towards the drop zone. Now, coming towards us down the camera was Leo Gillis. Now, earlier, a guy called James Luce had come up this same track towards the camera. He was in F Company 501st, and when he got to the corner on the road, he turned right towards the Loney Farm. As he turned right, he exposed his back to a position to his left where a German machine gun, possibly a Georgian Ospitale machine gun, possibly Fallschirmjäger. I think if I had to put my, work out what it was, I would say Georgian. And James Luce was wounded, really badly wounded by machine gun fire. Now, when Leo Gillis and Quincy Cougar are coming down this road later on, James Luce is walking about, but he's walked back down the knee. He hasn't been actually taken out of the battle yet. And his right hand is holding his left wrist where he was hit. And as he points to where the German machine gun fire was coming from, his left hand nearly falls off because it was only held on by a couple of tendons at this point. He had to put his hand back quickly on his wrist again to stop his hand falling off. I'm sorry to be so dramatic, but that's how these injuries were. So Leo Gillis has now been given warning. There's various other guys there. Don Schinkoth, I forgot the other chapter's name, Robert something or other. They now know there's a German position there. So now there's new houses around this corner now, so it doesn't look exactly. So Leo Gillis from this corner here, the German machine gun, I wait when the video goes on a bit, the German machine gun was just on that corner there. You can see as I go around the corner about now, it was about where that red gate post, well, on the earth bank where that gate post is there, you see. And Leo Gillis jumps down with his M1 rifle, bang, kills a German there, and eliminates that German who had killed and wounded several people and called James Luce. And this is the so-named Gillis Corner. For a full account of the Gillis Corner story, you can either read my book or you can read various ones of Mark Bandeau's books because he writes about Leo Gillis all the time. This is the lavoir, the French means of going and washing their clothes hundreds of years ago. That if you're driving this area today, it shows you that you're in Haute-Adville. If you see the lavoir, you're at Gillis Corner. There's no sign up saying Gillis Corner. It's just what us 101st Airborne historians call it. So that's where Gillis, I'll pause it there. That's where Gillis was. So just there. And then the German machine gun was there. But it's in this environment here. As we look at that photo there, basically Americans left-hand side of the road, Germans on the right-hand side of the road, and Germans over there. And this was the front line for most of the morning of June the 6th, running into the afternoon of June the 6th. Now, as the camera pans back round, we go back up towards the Lowly Farm. I'll tell you this story from Don Baguette's book. So Courier here, Screaming Eagle in Normandy. It's there, folks. Brilliant book. I've got 4 copies of it. Now, on June the 7th, or possibly on June the 8th, I think June the 7th, there'd been a big firefight to take the Lonely Farm. It had been taken once, then kind of lost it again. It's kind of recurring story of places changing hands. But Don Brinnenstuhl, an A Company 506 sergeant, had been taken a couple of Germans prisoner in this farm there. And somewhere along the side of the road here, they make a break to run away. And Don Brinnenstuhl, at very close range, shot them with his Tommy gun. Now, because they were kind of close to this earth bank on the right, they kind of fell over, but they fell against the embankment. They were kind of standing upright. And Don Baguette, who, if you've read his book, he's very vivid how he describes things. He talks about both the Germans, or their eyes had popped out with the force of the shots, and they were kind of hanging on their cheeks, and they were standing, these 2 dead Germans, against this earth bank here for like several hours. If you watched the Dead Man's Corner show a few days ago, you can understand how these places earn their names, because any American soldier going up this track over the next few hours, you're not going to miss 2 dead Germans leaning up against an earth bank with their eyes hanging out on their face. And it's how these macabre names, you can now begin to understand how places like La Zone Maudite, the Curse Zone, earn their names. And later on in this battle, Don Baguette saw a German MP40, a Schmeiser we call it, kind of poke its way through the hedgerow. And Don was so close, he didn't know whether to shoot or not. So he kind of grabbed the barrel of the submachine gun and kind of held it so the German couldn't fire. This is the kind of combat that these hedgerows create. If you've seen anything about the hedgerows, the thickness of these hedgerows means you can be 6 foot away from your enemy and not know what's going on there. But there's lots of great stories around this area here. I'm just telling you a few of them. But this is the area where the majority of the wounded that were eventually taken to the church were sustained. So I do hope you're enjoying this. So this is the field to the left, looking over towards Les Drury. Now, Les Drury was an important farm because it had an access road north to the D913 road, and an access road south to Haute Adville. So it kind of bridged two little parts of the village, and that's Les Drury over there in the background, folks. You can see it kind of stands higher. It's just a kind of I think non-Normandy people own it. I think they live in Paris or something now, and I'm not sure, but it's private property. But this is the area of the fighting. I found spent cases numerous times just walking in the little ditch along this track many times. Not even with a metal detector, just seeing it in the water there, just because of so much gunfire happened in this area here. And I hope these images are kind of giving you an idea what it'd be like to be in this area, because we can't travel because of restrictions. Hopefully it's all opening up soon. Now that, as we go around the corner, that's the road up towards Les Drury. I think I walk down there. I come up the earth bank and I show you across the D913. And I want to point out, if we can see it from there. No, we can't see it from there. I forgot which footage I took. Oh, no, now we go down towards Les Drury. So this kind of area here marked eventually on June the 6th, kind of again, the lines. Americans behind us, Germans ahead of us, because Les Drury took quite some time to take. So that's the area of Les Drury. I hope you've appreciated what we're talking about there. Right, next. And here's some post-war or just post-D-Day photos of the Loney Farm. I'll go back to there's, you can see there's the same building. And there it is. I think that's in the 1950s, that photo. And then here's some photos of damage. You can see it was heavily damaged. This would have been a combination of American mortars, 2nd Battalion 501st mortars, and German mortars, because although the Fallschirmjäger and the Georgians are on the ground in Haute Adville, von der Heydt has his 3rd Battalion and in reserve in Carenton, and with them is his heavy weapons company, his mortars. So a lot of the damage here would be from German mortars coming from kind of the outskirts of Carenton, and you can see lots of holes in the wall through there from the fighting. George Schmidt. Now, I'm not going to go off on too much of a subject about George Schmidt because it would be a story in his own right, but here's a map showing, and this is from Rendezvous with Destiny, the official 101st Airborne history. There's Les Drury, there's the Loney Farm on the corner, up there is Angoville-au-Plain. Now, 2nd Battalion 501st, under Colonel Robert Ballard, mostly landed in the flood. There's the flooded area marked very well for you there. This is the assembly area. Some of them ended up moving into Angeville, some of them ended up moving into Haute Adville. And they can't go backwards because there's water, but they've got to get out towards their objectives. And you can see how this kind of crucial crossroads here near Les Drury is important. Well, George Schmidt, Lieutenant George E. Schmidt, led a charge down, parallel to Chasse-au-Prel on the morning of June the 6th at about 8 a.m. under Colonel Ballard's orders to dislodge the Germans in the Loney Farm. Now, he was standing on a hedgerow parallel about here, parallel to this road here. Here's the road. He was in a hedgerow there, urging his men forward, when a German rifleman inside the farm hit him, and he was fatally wounded. He didn't die yet. He was dragged into the lane and died sometime later. And various people remember seeing Schmidt either wounded or eventually later on dead, lying in the track, which I will show you footage of shortly. But Schmidt, the reason we're doing his story is, of course, he received posthumously the Distinguished Service Cross for this. So one of the highest, the second highest award, and not many Distinguished Service Crosses on D-Day in the grand scheme of things. And that's why there's the plaque on the building. He's buried at the Omaha Beach Cemetery in Normandy. Definitely worth going and seeing his grave. An amazingly brave guy. But this is the fighting, the men in E Company who were wounded attacking the manor house, the men fighting around here, the Georgians in it. This is where the majority of the wounded were being sustained. Now, in terms of proper medical attention, there's nothing nearby. Up in Hiesville, about 5 or 6 miles north, is a proper 326th Airborne Medical Company hospital. And down near La Barquette, so maybe 1.5 miles, 2 miles south, Colonel Johnson has a fairly decent aid station there. And then Chaplain Francis Sampson down near Penem is running another aid station, but he has really no medics with him. He is a chaplain. But this is all getting to how Angeville becomes important later as an aid station. That's the Schmidt story there. Angoville-au-Plain itself. So some people we're going to talk about. I just mentioned Colonel Ballard, the 2nd Battalion 501st Commander. Lieutenant Ed Allworth, the adjutant. He was in Ken Moore's aircraft, so his aircraft, as I said earlier, nearly didn't make it to Normandy. If he hadn't made it to Normandy, he wouldn't have been here. And I'll talk about this chap on the right, Francis Liberatore of C Company 326 Airborne Engineers. He ends up having an important part in the defense of Angoville-au-Plain against encroaching German Fallschirmjäger. Phew. Here's the area we're talking about now. So there is Angoville-au-Plain. North is in the correct place. The church is there. The drop zone is over here. See, I've marked over here, drop zone D. Here's the little hamlet of Beaumont. This little track that curves its way through the village, Chasse-Quinault. I will be talking about that later on. And this is Ferme d'Alain, one of the kind of larger French dwellings in Angoville-au-Plain. Now I'll play the footage, and I will take just a sip of water while it's playing. So that road to the left there, we're just passing, is the track down to the drop zone I talked about. So up from that track to the left, numerous parachuters come in the morning of D-Day, still dark. A lot of them don't know where they are because they've missed their drop zone. They're looking for distinguishing features. They're looking for church towers, or they're looking for buildings they recognize. Angoville-au-Plain is just very small farms and lots of hedgerows. Most of these guys have no idea where they are. Now, the farm coming up here on the right is Ferme d'Alain. And I'll be talking about that in a minute. Again, look at how thick the hedgerows are. This is the road that runs through Angoville-au-Plain. So we're facing towards Haute-Adville right now. And I didn't have much time to go back and play around with the footage and edit it and stabilize it because I took it 2 days ago, but I hope you're enjoying it. I'll tell you who ended up in Ferme d'Alain in a minute. So just keep enjoying the photo as we go, or the footage as we're going. And paratroopers don't know where they are. Ken More lands in the drop zone in the water. He had come up the track that I mentioned. He didn't know where. Now we're facing back the other way now. Now, somewhere from the right is where Lieutenant Frank Gregg ended up. Now, he was in F Company 501st, and he's meant to be leading a platoon of men. So the first thing you do is you got to find some men. He had about half a dozen with him, maybe a few more. But the second thing he needs to do before he can work out how he's going to engage the enemy is work out where the hell he is. Now, in Ferme d'Alain, there was a light on or something. You got the sense there was something going on. Maybe someone had come out for a smoke because they're watching the aircraft flying over. And he went into Ferme d'Alain on the morning of D-Day. So it's like 2 in the morning. And there was a 20-year-old French girl called Gilbert Moser. And Gilbert had with her her month-old baby, Christiane that had been born in May 1944. And Frank Gregg doesn't speak any French. He's trying to kind of pull out his map case. He's soaking wet. He looks like the creature from the Black Lagoon. He's got, it's middle of the night, soaking wet. And he asks her, where are we? And he gets his map out, and she points to Angoville-au-Plain. He finds out how he is in Angoville-au-Plain. It was in this building here to the right. Not only does she point out on the map where he is, she goes out into that same street with him and points both directions down the road, both towards the church and towards Haute-Adville, and says, Les Boches, Les Boches. So Frank Gregg finds out very quickly there's kind of Germans everywhere, which is par for the course for D-Day. So, that's the nature of parachute. Wherever you go, there are already Germans there. But this is where he's told. Now, because she seemed to point with more intensity to the church direction, so this direction, Frank went the other way. He ended up going off towards where Colonel Ballard was near Chasse-au-Prel. He could have gone the other way, but Gilbert seemed to kind of point out the other way was more dangerous. So he didn't go this way. But now you can see as we're coming up towards the road from the drop zone. So this is where the majority of men who arrived in Angoville-au-Plain came from. We get there in a minute. And again, I do hope you're enjoying this. It's a lot of detail. I was worried about having enough time to fill an hour. We're 40 minutes in. I've hardly got a quarter of the way through it yet. So there's the road coming in from the right there from the drop zone. So up that road, numerous guys come, including later on Ken More. Now, Ken More, 6'2", had already been treating wounded men as he made his way towards the village. Now, why is he going to the village? No particular reason. He doesn't even know it's a village. It's high ground. It's out of the floods. He's just going naturally where it looks like there's a better chance of being dry. It's not because he's particularly aiming for anywhere. But this is the view towards Angoville-au-Plain. Now, This farm on the right, I'm definitely not going to go into this as a side story because just no time, but this ends up becoming Colonel Robert F. Sink of the 506th 2nd Normandy Command Post. His first one in Couleville, his second one was the Monday. It's a bed and breakfast now, but I'm not going to do about it. It's just a side story. Lots of things happen there, but beyond what we can talk about today. And this is the arrival into Angoville-au-Plain from the west. And there's the famous church. And I've got lots of footage inside the church for you later on, folks. So there we are. I think I'll move on to that. That's good. Now, Frank Gregg, the guy who spoke to Gilbert Moser. One of the things I didn't put in the book is that 20 years later, he was one of the advisors on Combat, the TV series. Now, I don't know which of these two figures he is in that photo there. He's either one on the left or the one on the right there, but he worked on it for like 4 seasons or something. He also apparently worked on A Bridge Too Far, at least in some kind of advisory capacity, and was in the military till the late 60s. But he became known as the go-to guy for Hollywood for getting paratroops and ground combat right. So Frank Foxy Gregg, 2nd Battalion, 501st, was an advisor on the series Combat. So that's a bit you didn't know from the book. So I promise there'll be some new stuff. This is stuff I've never taken a group here. This is Schinkoth. This is that curving track. Now, some really kind of cool stuff happened here because it runs through the middle of it, around this kind of arc here. So there's Ferme-Dalan, where we just were. Over here is La Guidonnerie, which is now a bed and breakfast owned by Dutch people, and Beaumont here. Now, Chasse-Canal was presumably just some kind of linking track for people to move from one side of each, although I don't know quite what its purpose was. But some more people are going to talk about. Elroy Hugh, PFC Elroy Hugh, was a line man in HQ Company 501st, so he puts out telephone lines. Lieutenant Harold Young, C Company 326, was an airborne engineer officer. He ends up landing near Hiesville, so 2 miles north, and gathers up about 50 guys moving off south towards the wooden bridges. Remember I talked about the wooden bridges? His job as an engineer is to go there to prevent the Germans destroying them, and maybe actually put his own charges there and destroy them himself if there's a danger of a German counterattack. So engineer gets the wooden bridges. So he's not intending to go into Angoville-au-Plain, but Angoville-au-Plain sits slap bang between where he landed and where he's going. So he comes into our story. And then there's Francis Liberatore again, who ends up, was also he was actually commanding officer of C Company 326. Lieutenant Young was a platoon commander. These come into our story. Now, here's my footage inside the chasse. Now, I've never taken a tour group through there. Don't get excited, folks. It's just a sunken lane that curves its way through. So I'm moving the camera down here now, folks. But this became an important part because when the various positions in Angoville start getting established, one little group of defenders here, one little group of defenders there, this was used as a connecting route by people who were going about checking positions, including Lieutenant Harold Young, who ends up in the village because he can't get through to the bridges because the fighting is so severe in Angoville-au-Plain. Now, so this is an important part there. And you can see this is your typical Normandy bocage. And this one hasn't been paved. It doesn't get cut. So you can really see, for those of you who've never been here, imagine moving through here in the middle of the night. You can't see your hand in front of your face. These hedgerows are thick. You can't see anything. But there's also part further up the track. There's something I want to talk about. And that is the French villagers, because we haven't really talked about them much apart from Gilbert Moser, who told Frank Gregg about the Germans. Because in the Beaumont side of the village, there's been lots of aircraft flying and lots of gunfire. Lines are establishing in the village, and the fighting is happening within the buildings, within the roads themselves. So the villagers, because they've been bombed in April 44, go and get my book. You'll find out about how a bombing raid to hit the Sotvast V weapons plant about 15 miles north ended up missing. And a whole lot of bombers fell on Angoville-au-Plain. And after then, mercifully, no one was killed. There were craters everywhere. There's a good view of the church there from the chasse. But the French villagers now know that bombing is a danger, and they had built I'm going to go back a bit. Hang on, we'll go back to where am I? I want to show you the building at the end of the track. There we are, there. Whoop, back a bit. That's now the Beaumont side, because in just somewhere up this track here, after April, the French had built a air raid shelter. I say shelter, it's a ditch with bits of wood and stuff and earth over it. And there's maybe 20, 30 French villagers sheltering in this shelter on the morning of D-Day to try and keep away from the fighting. And later on, they make their way up through this track to get to where they're supposed to go. I'll tell you about that later. But one of the guys who landed near here was Elroy Hugh. Now, Elroy Hugh, who you saw a photo of a minute ago, the lineman, he landed just north of Schinkoth, and he had landed in fact, in fact, he probably is about in that field there somewhere. In that field, there was a crater, and he lands in and crawls into it. Now, he's had a really bad jump. He's smashed up his ankle, and you can read his whole story in the book because it would take 20 minutes to do it, and I just won't have the breath to do it. I call it the Odyssey of Elroy Hugh. But he ends up hearing firefights. One medic comes through from another unit at one point, says, just lace your boot up tight, Satan. He doesn't come again. And then two other guys, he doesn't know who they are, F Company guys or something, come up and they fire, and they carry him with him sitting on a rifle. So they have holding the rifle between them like a stretcher, and they carry him down this hedgerow lane to the church, which they now realize is an aid station. So Elroy Hugh witnesses things going on up and down this track, and it's just a cool story that I can't do in complete details of, but you can see how close they are to the church. And now I'm going back towards Ferme d'Alain. I'll let the footage play. I will have a sip of water because I'm feeling it today. But viewing numbers are going up, so people must be liking what I'm doing. So that's good. Angoville-au-Plain has had quite a lot of modern construction these days. So there are new houses amongst the original ones there, but that's fine. It's progression, it's development. That's all good. But this is where Elroy Hugh was eventually taken up by these two guys on a rifle and turned left, as we will do ourselves, off towards the church. I think we do. Why do I turn the camera to the right? Oh, I turn the camera to the right. And then perhaps I spin it right. There's Mag again, trying to get out of the camera shot. Right. Moving on. There's Elroy Hugh. He died in 2010. There's actually a video on YouTube. You can see his burial there with the colour party and the honour guard on YouTube from 2010. So that's quite good. Now, let's get to church. We've been 50 minutes in, haven't really got to church yet. So Robert Wright and Kenneth More were in the 2nd Battalion, 501st. That's Robert on the left there, Ken on the right. In the middle is Hank Rossetti, who ended up in an aid station down near the Wooden Bridges. Read about him in Ian Gardner and Roger Day's incredible book, Tonight We Die as Men. I took his son on tour about 3 or 4 years ago, and we traced where he ended up being. So Hank Rossetti and they knew both of these guys. Some footage I just took of Angeville in the evening one day. I did that about a year ago. Now, this is how it would have looked when Robert Wright and Kenneth More got there in the morning, except not lit up. I mean, if it was lit up by gunfire and flak, not by floodlights. But that's just giving you a bit of atmosphere of what it'd be like in the night. And then here is my approach to Angoville-au-Plain Church. So for those who haven't been here, this is the church, 11th century church. Now, Ken More had come from the direction I am walking the camera now from the drop zone. I told you that earlier. Robert Wright has come from the other side of the church, and he landed near a little stream, basically. And they'd both seen the church tower, and they both headed there. And at some point on the morning of D-Day, they decide to set up an aid station inside this church. Now, official accounts written at the time and at the end of the war say that Lieutenant Ed Allworth, who was the adjutant, had set up the aid station in the church. Now, he was undoubtedly given the job by Lieutenant Colonel Ballard of setting up an aid station and probably went off to try and find somewhere. But by the time he got to the church, it's clear that Bob and Ken had already set up inside it. They'd already started treating wounded. So Ed Allworth was important in terms of telling people about the aid station, moving people there, and he helped set up a defense of the church perimeter later on. But he almost certainly did not actually set up the aid station themselves. Now, this is the door that Bob had seen. Bob had in his pack like a 3-foot by 2-foot Red Cross flag. And as Neil Cherry was talking about yesterday, the first thing you do, one of the first things you do if you're setting up an aid station is you identify it as a neutral location, because the enemy, the Germans, are meant to be respectful of a neutral environment, as we are respectful vice versa. So on that door there, he pins a Red Cross flag identifying it as an aid station, and Ken arrived with 1 or 2 wounded soldiers on there. This is exactly what would have happened, and they went in, they sit in dark. When Bob and Ken first walked in that church at something like 2:30 on the morning of June the 6th, 77 years ago, seeing this building, and they saw the pews, and they realized big, thick walls, ideal place to start treating wounded. There's a 1973 photo of the church. You can see there was grass in front of it at the time, but basically looks much like it does today. This is Bob, by the way, where he landed near this little stream, and he actually landed not in the stream. He landed beside it, and it's narrow, but it's probably quite deep. It's probably 4 or 5 feet deep. He was mercifully just landed just outside of. That's him probably in his first visit back in the 90s. It's interesting when you're someone like me, you can see the progression of when the like Paul Reed is watching. When we knew the veterans first, they were guys in their 60s and 70s, and then they became 80s, and they became 90s. And you see as you go back through the photos how much aging goes on, alas. But this is Bob when he was still, very able to move around and leap about. He was doing, I remember him doing 50 push-ups in one straight, but then he was doing his right arm ones, just on one arm, amazingly fit. And then in the last few years, of course, health had affected him. This is Bob in 2000 coming in the church, but imagine him doing this, and there's with a flag he brought back here. But imagine him in that situation on June the 7th, same kind of thing, jump smock, Red Cross armband, coming in there, and you can see the emotion on his face of what it means to him when he was able to come back to that church decades later. When he would step in that door, you could see all the memories flooding back. They start setting wounded inside the church. They start using the pews, and it starts off in a kind of, they just place them wherever they come in. They have no idea at this point that eventually there's going to be between 80 and 90 wounded men brought in there. So they start putting them wherever they can fit them. Later on, they realize they have to kind of adopt more of a kind of a priority situation, put the ones with injuries that have been patched up near the kind of the further to harder to get to, and the ones in the middle of the aisle, so you can treat them if you need to go back and adjust tourniquets and things like that. So they start moving them around. But Bob Wright, who's 5'2", imagine you've put now a paratrooper who's 5'10", who's wounded, in the wrong place, and you want to move him to somewhere else. Even just picking up a guy and moving him would be really difficult. Now, this kind of comes out of sequence now, but just because I've got to fit it all in somewhere. At some point during the day of June the 6th, German mortars, probably from the south or south west, hit the church. Now, they're almost certainly not trying to hit the aid station because they know it's an aid station. They want to be bad people killing wounded. It's not that they're just hitting a known environment of where Americans are, and the rounds are hitting the church just because it's just in the way. But to see that bench there in the middle there, Ken was treating a guy just there. They'd run out of pews by this point, and he had just taken his helmet off for a few seconds to wipe the sweat away, because although it's a cold church, he was working hard. He had his jumpsuit on over his wool uniform below it. And as he took the helmet off, German mortars hit the roof, and a lump of plaster fell down and hit him in the head and cut his head open. You had to bandage himself up. And then the next round of, he put a bandage on, puts the helmet back on. The next salvo of mortars, while the mortar bombs hit the roof and came through, making the hole there. Now, one of the holes there is for the bell rope, and the other hole is where the mortar came through. And I don't ever quite know which one is which. I don't know. One of them is where the mortar came through. And the 81 millimeter mortar, we pretty much know it was 81 millimeter because that's what the support company of the Fallschirmjäger near Carenton had, 81 millimeters. The mortar came through the roof, and it slammed into the stones floor about 2 feet away from where Ken was and about 10 feet away from where Bob was. And they said it was like, well, there's moments in film where time freezes, and they saw this thing and expected to detonate, and it didn't. And Bob picked it up and threw it out the window of the church. All the windows were blown out in the fighting. And there is the bit where the mortar bomb hit but didn't explode. If you haven't been here, this is hopefully like being there. If you have been to the church and you found this location, Rich Riley is watching this. I've taken Rich there. This is my kind of recreation of the mortar shell hitting. Now, I don't know why the mortar shell didn't explode. Was it a dart? Had some factory worker sabotaged it? Was there some kind of power at work? I don't know. But for whatever reason you'd like to attribute it to, the mortar didn't explode, but it threw it up and threw it out the window, and no harm was done. So the wounded that we know were being sustained down in Les Drury. Now, I told you about the fact some had been sustained in Angoville. Ken had arrived with a couple of wounded. The majority are being wounded down in Les Drury, near Deloney Farm, near Les Drury, which is about 700 yards away, 800 yards away, something like that. Now, I've just said Bob Wright is 5'2", Ken is 6'2", but how are you going to bring back wounded guys? Now, in the farm across the road from the church, they found a 2-wheel farm cart that could be pulled by like a donkey or a cow or a horse, but kind of small, probably more of a donkey than a horse. And it was balanced, and they realized they could use that to bring back wounded. All they would need is help to get the guy on the cart, and then under their own power, they could then wheel the guy back up to the church. And both guys, Robert and Ken, went out on solo runs to get more wounded. Now, Ken did the majority of the runs because he was the lesser trained medic. Bob had 3 months training at Atlanta General Hospital, so he was more advanced than Ken. Sometimes when Ken needed a break, because you can imagine the exertion of pulling wounded guys up, Rob would go out on a mission just to rotate it a bit. These are some of the guys I'm going to be talking about over the next few minutes. Donald Schinkoth, he was in the same movement with James Luce, Quincy Cougar, and Leo Gillis earlier near Gillis Corner. Then in F Company 501st were 2 Johnsons, Stanley and Charles, and they were known universally to their buddies as Stanley Big Ass Johnson and Charlie Short Ass Johnson. That was just their names. And then there's Sergeant James P. Knight, and there's another photo of Ken Moore there on leave. Well, I didn't put in the book. I'll try to give you a couple of different photos you've not seen before. Now, this is Chasse des Prels. So I'm facing north towards Angoville. There on the right is Deloney Farm, and I'm now going to take you up the track to Angoville. Now, I know some of you have toured with me, like Brian Yee has been here, Rich Riley. You've not walked this track with me because when we're touring, there's not the time to do it because you've got lots of stuff to see. But now, for the first time, you're going to experience the route Ken and Bob would have taken back and forth. So this is what we're doing. I'll pause it there. There's the Loney Farm. There's and the chasse goes up here. See, it goes up past this big farm called Les Prels. Now, there was no one in that farm on June the 6th because that was the former mayor's residence, and he had moved out in May 1944. Again, full story in the book, but he's not there. But this track is where they're moving. Now, the drop zone is over here. So the Americans kind of hold this area here. The Germans are pushing up the D913. Now, for the morning of D-Day, the Americans kind of have both sides of this track. They've kind of pushed into Beaumont here. Captain Liberatore is holding a position here in Beaumont. There's Frank Gregg has sent some guys up. Ed Allworth has sent some guys up. They're defending Angoville-au-Plain. The Americans kind of hold all this area. But when the Americans, bizarrely, as the Americans actually gain the success of taking Deloney Farm, what's happening at the same time is 1st Battalion Fallschirmjäger are moving up the D913 towards Saint Marie de Mont, and they kind of push the Americans out. And so as the day wears on, where the Americans at one point held both sides of the track, towards the afternoon, they only hold the right-hand side. And in fact, most Americans have moved south. There's kind of no one. This is almost becoming no man's land. So as they make this journey again and again and again, it gets worse and worse as the day goes on because of more and more Germans arriving. So I'll put it back on the footage. And very little has changed this track now. It is exactly how it would have been at the time. So this is, again, for the next best thing to being here is this footage I took 2 days ago out. And it was a lovely sunny day today then. So it was supposed to be raining today. It's not actually raining today. It's not as bad as it was predicted, but it's very muggy and this footage is very nice. So there's various points in this film. I kind of point out things and put captions on to give you an idea of where we are. I'll just have a sip of water again. I don't know how many words I've said, but it's a lot. But so this is going towards Angoville-au-Plain. So imagine either Ken or Bob going down to the area near Deloney Farm, picking up a wounded or maybe 2 wounded if they were smaller, putting them on a cart and then wheeling it up through here. Now, both Ken and Bob remember that I'm pointing where the camera is, and I want to give you the idea of the water tower to give you a frame of reference. There's the water tower over there. See, when you're going watching this later and you get your Google Earth out and you get your maps out, you can work. There's Lake Drury. Now that's in jump. Whoops, I didn't mean to do that. I pressed the wrong button. There we go to the bit. There we go. There's the. Now the Drury is on high ground, so also there were Germans in that position at some point. So if you imagine, if you're a rifleman there, you've got a view on this track as well. So even at the early part, it was kind of under fire from various locations. Now we're looking across the D913. There's actually a car going down it. So that's on its way to Utah Beach, effectively, what we would now call Utah Beach. And that's the water tower near Saint-Côme-du-Mont. Give you a location. So this is the track they use with the wagon to go and bring up these wounded people. We're moving north towards Angoville now. So this is, say, what these guys did. I'll just keep playing it and I'll tell you various stories. Now, later on, Ken is I don't know where the cart is at this point, but he's picked up a wounded guy and he's kind of carrying him. His name is Sergeant Ed Fatboy Hughes. Now, Hughes had been hit in the face, but he looks in a really bad shape. He's kind of not talking very well. He's lost a lot of blood. And Ken kind of almost puts him over his shoulder. He's carrying, and you can imagine if he's called Fat Boy, it's not because he's a slim guy. And he's carrying a Fat Boy Hughes up this track all the way, 600 yards. This is maybe Ken's, let's say it's his 10th journey of the day. I don't know. And the funny part of that story is when they finally get, the church is like 50 yards away, Ken has to stop for a breather and say, I'm just going to have to put you down for a second because I can't sit, I can't carry. And Fat Boy goes, it's all right, I can walk if you want. And Ken was like, why didn't you tell me that 20 minutes ago? And he'd been carrying this guy up who actually could have walked. He hadn't lost as much blood. Now, this was so looking south of the Loney Farm. Remember I told you about Lieutenant Schmidt and his action on 8 a.m. on the morning of June the 6th? That building there on the right, on the left-hand side of the farm is where the German rifleman was. I say sniper rifleman. And if you visit there now, with permission of the owner, you can go there and there's all bullet holes around that where American return fire. So I'm standing kind of where Schmidt was mortally wounded in this hedgerow there. So I'm just showing you that. It's about, I'm not doing the full, but it's down into the camera is where E Company 501st attacked. And so the sniper build position was in that building there on the left. The fatally wounded Schmidt, and he was lying in the track here for some time until he eventually passed away. So that's the view back towards Schmidt. Yeah, the Fat Boy Hughes story is a good one. A lot of these personal stories, they come from Mark Bando, this historian whose work is fantastic. And I recommend his books, Vanguard of the Crusade, Avenging Eagles, Screaming Eagles in Normandy. John Zveda is saying that there were 191st Artillery being killed there. Yeah, probably. Yeah, some artillery guys there. So this is now right-hand side is the drop zone, and kind of Americans hold that, and then later on the day the Germans start holding the left-hand side. And this, hopefully, this video is giving you the idea of how long it takes. It took me maybe 10 minutes to walk up it, and I did it once, and I had a decent breakfast. And I wasn't carrying a wounded guy, and no one was shooting at me. Do it after a night of no sleep, jumping out of an aircraft. You're 5'2", as Bob Wright was, or 5'4", sorry, and you're carrying a wounded guy. You know, incredible work these guys did. There's actually now a massive, great farm being built on left. The Thermoprel is undergoing a massive, great development, which is good. It's not like it's, I mean, all these areas are battlefield, but I love to see the village of Angoville-au-Plain progressing and moving on, and there's new people moving in, because new people moving in means money, it means people to vote, it means people to maintain the monuments, it means people to keep the stories alive. If a village ends up dying, stories get lost. So to me, I don't see new building as a bad thing necessarily. It can also mean the survival of villages, which means the survival of stories. Now I'm arriving at the entrance to the Thermoprel. There's Mag there waiting for me in the van. And I'm showing you back. There's that big farm that's being built. You can see the big building over there being built. And I'm now showing the entrance to the Thermoprel, which is just over up that track there. So that is the farm. Right. Now, hopefully, we've got to get in. I want to give you the idea of how the lines are changed. This is where I've got my Google Earth images. So bear with me. So blue is American, red is German. I could have done the other way around. That's the way I decided to do it. So early morning on D-Day, you've got these little enclaves being set. And this is the map, the image where north is not directly up. It's to fit it all in. So you've got the Georgians of the 795 Hospital over here near Les Drury, near Haute-Adville. You've got the American kind of base near the drop zone, and that's the other parallel tracks. That's the one there. The James Leo Gillies had moved up from the drop zone to arrive at Gillies Corner here. Then there's Chasseau-Pril, which I just showed you coming up here, and the farm. And now there's a massive, great barn being built here. Now you've got an enclave around the church. Frank Gregg and Ed Allworth are both involved in assigning some guys of F501st to defend the now established aid station in the church. You've got Liberatore of the C Company 326 engineers, who's kind of got enclave there in Beaumont. Lieutenant Harold Young, whose photo I showed you, is kind of moving up and down Chaskeno there between the various positions here and here, kind of checking on people, checking people who've got ammo, and trying to kind of keep things together as Germans are, as you'll see in a minute, kind of arriving in the village. And then you've got the Germans over. That's the morning. This is by the afternoon. Now, by the afternoon, the Americans, as they move and have taken Deloney Farm, they're kind of moving. See there how they're nearer the farm, and now later they're moving west. They're gaining, but as they're gaining the area they need, they're leaving more and more of a gap away from Angoville. Does that make sense? The Germans are still in Les Drury. We haven't taken that yet. But what's happened is that Liberatore's position in Beaumont, he had about 40 or 50 guys there of C326 and a few 501st guys. They've had Fallschirmjäger, first pound Fallschirmjäger guys coming up this road kind of all day, putting pressure on them. And they've ended up falling back north to Cullerville, which you know from Band of Brothers, where Colonel Sink sets up his first CP. So there ends up being no Americans there. Other Americans in Angoville have pulled back this way to the farm on the edge of the village. And the reason they went there is that's where the French villagers have gone as well. The villagers who have been sheltering in the ditches here at Beaumont have ended up using the same Chaskeno to avoid the fighting. As the Germans are coming in, see how they're going away from the direction of the Germans coming this way. The French move up this way, and the French are going up through the village to the farm up here because they know it's the furthest away without going on the main road. No one wants to go near the main road because that's where the Germans are going to be. But there's a track up there, and that's where the mayor, Daniel, lives or did live. So there's a movement. So some of the Americans who are wounded, or perhaps they've got no ammo left, or they've got no command, they end up kind of getting in with the French and end up here in the farm. So you've now got a situation where the Americans are being split. And the next image makes more sense. Because Liberatore is gone, the Americans have lost Beaumont. The Americans have moved in. They eventually take Les Drury here. But what's happened is there's a gap. You've got the gap between the Americans here and then lots more to the north near Cullerville, near Saint-Marie. And this is when, on the evening, late afternoon of June the 6th, Angoville-au-Plain is firmly in German hands. Now, during the course of the day, people say, I remember one of the original little books about this said the village changed hands like 9 times in a day. I don't know that it changed hands so much as just kept switching back and forth as various sides kind of jostled the position. But by the evening of June the 6th, Angoville-au-Plain is now in German hands. A lieutenant, and it may have been Allworth, we don't think it was, may have been Frank Gregg, may have been someone else, may have been Harold Young. Someone goes into the church and tells Bob and Ken, we're falling back. Those Americans that are still there have got to fall back now to Ballard's positions here near Haute-Adville. And they say to Bob and Ken, let's grab the wounded, let's go. And Bob and Ken said, what do you mean let's grab the wounded? There's probably 30 or 40, maybe 50, 60 guys there. Now there's guys like Bill Osborne, the lieutenant, who's got his legs in splints. He's got broken legs. You can't move these guys. They've got water. There's a water pump across the square. They're being treated. They're in care. They can't move them. Where are they going to take them? Who's going to carry them? How are they going to get there? So Bob and Ken say, well, we can't move them. So the officer, whoever it was, says, well, you better decide what you guys are going to do. Do you want to come with us or do you want to stay with the wounded? Well, of course, Bob and Ken stay with the wounded. That's their job, is to stay with the wounded. So during the arrival of the Fallschirmjäger, I want to mention this gentleman here. Well, we think it's him. In my book, I couldn't give his name because he didn't want his full name to go in the book, but he's since passed away. I call him Joachim D. His real name was Joachim Dams, 11th Company, 6th Fallschirmjäger, attached to 1st Battalion. And he says this is him. He was the assistant MG42 gunner. So the assistant carries the weapon. He said this is him running through that area on D-Day. It may or may not be. I've got my sneaking suspicions that's 3rd Fallschirmjäger near Saint-Lô. But either way, it's a Fallschirmjäger guy with MG42. If it isn't Joachim Dams, it might as well be. And he's one of the guys who's pushing into the village. Now, he, on June the 6th, remember this name, Joachim Dams, Germans are taking their wounded to the church. That's the interesting story that we're coming up to later on. And he remembers getting to the church and depositing wounded at the church. Now, I'll elaborate on that story in a minute. Overnight, this is now the situation where things get really difficult. And I've got more footage playing while I tell these stories, okay? Just have another sip of water. So Bob and Ken have now been here all day. It's overnight on June the 6th and 7th. The F Company 501st positions that were defending the aid station, they've gone. All they've got now is their own wounded and themselves there, and they're running out of supplies, and it's looking rather bleak. Now, there are various encounters with Germans that night, at least 2, maybe more. Now, the first one is where a German officer, possibly an NCO, but with a peaked cap, comes in. And he's a kind of a friendly-ish chap. He says, look, the village is in our hands now, and I will try and keep out of the way of you. I'll let you do your work. And in fact, can you start looking after our wounded? And there were already a couple of German wounded there. And Bob and Ken, that's their oath. They are medics. They agree. Of course, they'll look after German wounded, and so they have to start looking after them. And some of the German troops throw their bandages to Ken and Bob to use. And this is all this footage I took, as I say, 2 days ago. Now, what's interesting, when Joachim Dams had arrived sometime earlier in the day, and this, I'm going to tell the story from Bob Wright's point of view. I said I would do this story. So Bob Wright is standing in the church, and I'll show you footage inside the church in a minute. He's working near the pulpit, and they've been bringing the wounded men in through the side door, the door I showed you through a minute ago. But the big doors they'd kept closed because the wind was coming in from that direction. And it was blowing up the men, and they had tried to put parachutes over the guys to keep them warm, although silk doesn't actually keep people warm. But suddenly, the doors flew open, and stood there in the doorway, silhouetted in the door, was a German machine gunner, belts of ammunition around his neck, just like you see in the movies. And German's first reaction as he looks around the church, this is the side door they were using. Whoops. The German's first Bob's first reaction was the German was going to shoot around the church. Now, what Bob doesn't know is that by this stage, the Germans probably know it's an aid station. He's just going in there with a machine gun because he's a machine gunner. He's just not going to let his weapon go. But there's a tense moment where Bob and the German make eye contact, and Bob is terrified of the Germans. That's the door the German comes in there, the one you can see on the right there. He's going to shoot around the church, but he doesn't. In fact, the German lowers the machine gun. He realizes it's just an aid station. And as he steps back out the door, he crossed himself. He was obviously a Catholic. And Bob remembered that moment. Now, standing behind that German machine gunner when that happened was Joachim Dams. So a German Fallschirmjäger veteran, or paratrooper, had seen inside the church and had made eye contact like his buddy with Bob Wright. Now, the machine gunner, by the way, was killed in the Battle of Normandy a few days later. And I don't know what his name was, don't know what happened to him. He was killed later on. But there was a moment when Bob thought the aid station would be wiped out. And it's not the Germans necessarily being aggressive. He maybe has been told it's an aid station, but you're going to double check, you know. And Allied soldiers will do the same thing. You're not going to just assume. Anyway, that was an intense moment there. So this is the church. Now we're moving inside the church. So this is inside the church. That's the side door they're bringing the wounded in through, and this is where they're packing these guys in. Now, by this time, you've got to imagine there's about 17 pews, something like that. there's at least 3 or 4 guys per pew by then. Some are sitting up, some are laying on the ground. Every available space has a wounded guy in it somewhere, because they had no idea when they set this up they were going to end up with 70 or 80 guys in there, possibly as many as 90. And of course, that's not counting the guys who went in, got a quick bit of treatment, and then went out and joined the battlefield again. So maybe over 100 were actually treated. And that's me taking footage from the pulpit there of the pews. And this is where the wounded were laid out. Now, in a second, I want to draw your attention to the end of the church, the altar, and the little room behind the altar, the sacristy, where the priest would keep his robes and paraphernalia for the services. I'll draw your attention to that in a minute. But this is inside the church. Now, I appreciate a lot of people watching this have been to Angoville-au-Plain, but a lot of people haven't been to Angoville-au-Plain. So if you haven't been there, this is the church we're talking about. This is where all this incredible events took place. And there's the door. That's the door, the very door that German machine gunner, who was a friend of Joachim Dam's, burst his way through and stood there in a doorway for a moment. And because he was silhouetted, Bob couldn't see the kind of expression in his face. That's where his fear came from. Now, the windows don't come out very well in the footage. I've got photos of the windows later on to show you. Don't worry, we'll get to them later on in due course. Well, we're an hour and a quarter in. I haven't got anywhere near finishing yet. So I hope you're enjoying it so far. I want to get up to where the sacristy is, because I want to remind you, these are medics. In fact, Ken isn't really even a medic. He's a stretcher bearer. They're coming in. Men are coming in, chest wounds, broken legs, arterial wounds. They're coming in with horrendous injuries. And later on, I'll talk about 2 men who had the very, very worst injuries. Now, at some point, when these very, very wounded men come in, who Bob knows are going to die, and there's the right-hand side of the church there. And so this is when Bob walks up to behind the altar, and he kicks in the door of the sacristy, opening up the little space behind to put the guys who aren't going to make it. Now, it's not because he's going to forget about them. It's not because it's because he doesn't want to sit these guys who are going to die beside other guys who are going to be fine, because they will have to watch one of their buddies die. And no one wants that. And Bob has to consider those that are going to make it over those who aren't going to make it. This is triage. Now, I will remind you, Bob is 20 and Ken is 19, and they are making decisions about not who live. It's beyond their control. There are some wounds that are too severe. They cannot do anything with them, and they can't even spare the morphine, because Bob told me morphine is for the living, not for the dead. There is not enough morphine. Morphine will help take the pain away and save a guy who's going to live. You can't, quote unquote, waste morphine on a guy who's not going to make it. Now there, I'll just pause it now. There is the door to the sacristy, and it's behind there where he puts the guys who aren't going to make it. So we'll get there in a minute. I'm just going to keep playing this footage there. So the second story of a German is a German, and this is more like coming to maybe towards the morning of the 7th, because it seems in the state when the Germans are now themselves losing the village, as the Americans are kind of coming in from Utah Beach. Gradually, there's more things moving in. The Battle of Vierville happened at dawn on June the 7th. The Fallschirmjäger now feel that they're kind of in a position that they can't, and untenable, they can't hold, and they're maybe thinking of falling back. And a German Fallschirmjäger officer, we think, stood outside the door. Bob happened to be in the doorway at this point, and the German had been hit in the groin area. And the German says, he spoke English, I demand treatment in your aid station. And Bob says, sure, but you will have to obey the rules everybody else has done, which is weapons stay outside. I hadn't specified that earlier, but it's a part of the story. Once they put the Red Cross flag on, they said, no weapons inside the church. And so the weapons were actually stacked up outside those big doors there. Now, this German officer refuses to take his pistol belt off. And Bob sort of squares himself up in the doorway and says, well, you're not coming in. And the German kind of at some point is thinking of almost threatening Bob and saying, I could shoot you and come in and take the supplies I need. And Bob says, well, you could shoot me and take the supplies you need, but it's my expertise you require more than the bandages. You've got a serious injury there. You need my training as well as my bandages. Take the pistol off, and then you can come in. Now, remember, the Germans are in control of the edge at this point. There's the sacristy door there again, just to remind you what we're talking about. Eventually, a couple of hours later, there's images of Bob and Ken on the wall there inside the church, glass images, celebrating their deeds here. Eventually, the German officer did take his pistol belt off. He came in and he refused any kind of morphine. Bob thinks he refused. He thought he was going to be drugged and might give away secrets. So he refused any morphine. But Bob treated him and saved his life. So there were Germans treated there as well. Important part of the story. And this is all some of the just for those who haven't been there. These are just details inside the church for those who've not had the fortune of being there. So just enjoyed it. That's a couple of incidents that happened overnight, which are worth talking about. Another thing that happened. Remember, to show the footage of that round bit of wood above the roof. That's the bell tower. Now, sometime very early in the morning of June the 7th, much to everybody's surprise, 2 German soldiers came out of the staircase. They hadn't even see the door there. The door there. Bob and Kenneth barely noticed there was a door. They're so busy treating wounded, and these 2 Germans had come out of the door there. They'd been there since the night of the 5th. Now we think they were artillery spotters for an artillery unit nearby. We don't know which one. Why they hadn't come down earlier, I don't know. Why they hadn't come down when the Germans are firmly in charge of it, I don't know. But they come down when the Germans are either losing their grip or they're being pushed out. And they've been watching the aid life-saving through the kind of cracks in the wood of the ceiling. And the 2 Germans came out the door, and they were like 16 years old or something. And one of them spoke English, and he said, "We're surrendering to you, but we'd also like to help." And Ken or Bob, I forget which one, reached into their pack and pulled out spare Red Cross armbands. You have spare armbands so you can appoint stretcher bearers. And they gave the 2 Germans armbands, and these 2 Germans start helping with water, adjusting tourniquets. They're no training, but some of these men just need a sip of water every now and then. These 2 German kids are an important part of the medical team here, starting sometime on the morning of June the 7th. So that's a really cool story. So that's great footage inside the church. Now keep on playing that, and then we'll come up to the story of the crosses. I go into more detail in my book. These are on the altar. These are probably Knights Hospitalier crosses. Now, whether they were carved there at the time of Knights Hospitalier, so 10th, 9th century, I don't know. But Knights Hospitaliers are the ones who set up the first hospital in Jerusalem. And you see Templar crosses. Templar crosses are slightly different quite often in churches, but Hospitalier crosses are rarer. And there's some weird coincidences between this church in Angeville and life-saving and medicine, because the Knights Hospitalier, David Thewlis in Kingdom of Heaven with Orlando Bloom plays a Knights Hospitalier. They are knights. They also carry medical packs. They are doctors as well. Remember, he saves Liam Neeson in the film. So there's Knights Hospitalier crosses on the altar, which is a kind of cool little story there. And apologies, I'm not really keeping up with the comments today. It's too much stuff going on. But I'll get up to these 2 very, very badly wounded guys in a minute. And I had no idea I'd be doing an hour and 25 minutes, and I haven't finished yet. We're 2/3 of the way through. We're nearly there. And these are the kind of souvenirs people leave there to Bob and Ken to this day: poppy crosses, patches, badges, candles, flowers, and there's actually a Red Cross armband at the moment there, which is a nice little touch. Someone has left that as a tribute at some point. So let's move on. This is the sacristy. This is photos behind the room in the back. This is where Bob put men who weren't going to make it. And the 2 we're talking about, Charlie Johnson, remember I talked about him, Shortass Johnson and Henry Ostrowski. Charlie Johnson had been wounded down near Oud-Advil, showed that location earlier. He'd actually saved the day. A German machine gun or a German position had a number of Americans pinned down. A few had been wounded. Charlie Johnson kind of took it upon himself to charge his position, killed the Germans, knocked out the machine gun nest, saved the lives, and was wounded. And then on his way, he was told to work his way to the church At this point, Ken and Bob weren't on their rounds with their wagon, and Charlie Johnson was kind of walking up towards the church under his own power. But somewhere along that Chastay, remember I told you how the Germans are encroaching on it as the day went on, so this is probably later in the day. He gets wounded a second time. And somehow it gets to the church. I think someone found him and helped him in the last bit there. And when Bob Wright sees him, he knows he's not going to make it. It's just lost too much blood, too many bullet wounds. And he puts Charlie in the sacristy behind. Now, Charlie, I don't know what was wrong with it. What was up with him? It was a head wound. It was the one that was going to kill him. His other wound as well was a head wound. He seemed to be in no pain. So shock or something had set in there. And he was talking lucidly. And every time he saw a friend of his in the church, because there are people dropping other wounded off, there are people, he knows there, Sergeant Knight was there, who you saw in the photo earlier. He starts telling people, make sure you go and visit my mom when you go back. He knew he wasn't going to make it. Charlie was 19 years old, and I didn't put this bit in the book, but just before he died, he starts emptying the contents of his pockets and his pack, and starts giving stuff to people, like here's my chocolate. You like chocolate, Ed? You have that. Here's my writing paper. Bill, you like writing, and he starts distributing his gear. And as he's kind of given the last bit of stuff away, he dies. And it's that weird thing that was going on where he's kind of relieving himself of his earthly possessions before moving on to something else. And he was from South Carolina, Charles Ray. So he died in the sacristy and was buried in a shallow grave just behind the church by the 501st for a few hours. And he was moved to Yesville and proper cemetery. Now, Henry Ostrowski, fascinating story. One of twins from South Philadelphia. Henry knew, and his brother John, they knew Bill Garnier and Babe Heffron, same part of South Philly. The area near the docks there. Those who are watching it, the area we're talking about. Rough Italian immigrants, Irish immigrants, in this case, Polish family. Henry's uncles. Henry had 7 uncles, I think it was, who were killed in Katyn in the 1940 massacre. If you go to the Katyn Memorial, there's 7 Ostrowskis on that list. But Henry's father had emigrated to the USA, Philadelphia, in 1904 or something, 14, something like that. Now, Henry Ostrowski was wounded again down in the track. I showed you near Gillis Corner. Most of his face was taken off by a mortar shell. Kelly wasn't going to make it. This is one, Ken was doing one of his runs with a cart, and Ken picks up Henry on his cart and takes him back to Angoville. Now, wasn't going to make it, but I guess Ken realizes at the time, better to bring this guy back to where his buddies are, bring him back to a place of sanctity rather than letting him die in a hedgerow. So he brings him back, even though he's not going to make it. Brought him to the church. Bob sees him, missing most of his face. He's not going to make it. Puts him in the sacristy. Now, where Charles, on the left there, was talking lucidly, didn't seem any pain, Henry Ostrowski was screaming. I mean, he was in a bad way, this poor lad. And this is when Bob kind of heartbreakingly told me years later how he kind of wished he could have shared some morphine with this guy, take away the pain. But by this point, there were so many wounded men coming in. He decided to keep the wounded for the morphine for the guys who are going to make it. And that's, again, this decisions these guys are making. And Ostrowski didn't make it. They're the twins when they were babies. I don't know which one's John or which one's Henry. The happy ending to the story there, it's a long story. I'm not going to do a great detail. The happy ending is Henry's twin, John, survived. Now, Henry'd been dating a girl called Laura. I say dating. It was one of those awkward relationships where I don't think her parents approved of her kind of dating a paratrooper, and it was a bit, you can imagine the times, you don't want to getting serious if someone's going to go overseas, and they wrote back and forth, and Henry keeps mentioning marriage, and Laura kind of avoids it, but you think it's not her avoiding it. I've got most of their letters on my hard drive. And then suddenly Laura, the kind of girlfriend, not girlfriend, hears nothing after June 1944 because he's dead. There's the letter there that the parents got, and Laura doesn't receive the notification because she's next of kin. And look, by the way, how much time had passed. The letter isn't dated till 25th of July. This guy died on June the 6th, maybe the morning of June the 7th, and it's 6 weeks beyond before the family hear what happens. And if ever you've read one of those, that's the standard, is regret to say that your son has been killed. Now, John is flying the hump. He's in the Army Air Corps. He's outside the world. He survives the war. He writes back and forth to some of Henry's buddies, trying to find out what happens, because he does hear from his parents, but months later, that his twin had been killed and the connection between twins. And John pieces together the story of what happened to his twin and writes to Laura to explain, because Laura's out of the loop, what's been happening to Henry. And they start a bit of a pen pal thing again. And when John, the surviving twin, makes it back home to Philadelphia, kind of the first thing he does is to go to visit Laura and sit her down and explain what he'd heard about Henry. And they have this emotional bond because they were identical twins. And well, the happy ending there is over the next few months, their love blooms. And John Ostrowski, Henry's twin, married Laura. And they had a child they named Henry after the twin who fell. Poor John, who survived, they reckon he died of a broken. He was only 62 or something when he died. He didn't live very long life. And Laura died, I think, in 2007 or something like that. Now, these are extracts I'm going to play you now of letters Henry wrote, just little extracts. And interesting, but this is what. Well, one's what Henry wrote, one's what John wrote. They're read by Shane Taylor. Read these. Well, Shane Taylor played Doc Rowe in Band of Brothers. He read these for my tour. So I'm going to play this. This is an extract of Henry's letter.
I didn't get into the Army to be a hero and wear stripes on my arm. I came in because I thought it was my duty and that I had a job to do, that's all. I don't want to be a dead or alive hero. I'll do my share and come back after this mess is over. I know I'm coming back. I don't think there's 3 Japs any better than myself or any other paratrooper. Then maybe there might be 4. Then I probably won't come back. But I'll not worry about that now.
Now, interesting, he says Japs. And I know that's a racial, well, we're not meant to use that, Japanese, but we're quoting a letter written at the time. But the point is, they didn't fight the Japanese, they fought the Germans. At the point he wrote that letter, remember you're in the military, you're at Fort Benning or somewhere, you're hearing rumors all the time coming in. We're going after this, we're going after North Africa, we're going to this. When he wrote that letter, the buzz was they were going to Pacific, I guess. So that's why that week he's thinking about the Japanese. But of course, there they fought the Germans. The second letter, this is John's letter. You'll hear.
They had jumped into the Germans, but the darkness had covered them, until one of the troopers saw a German coming up on them. At that time, one of the fellows let go with a burst of the machine gun, and the sparks of the gun was like a light to the Germans. They found their position and laid down a mortar barrage that caught Henry and a few others. Mousy said he too was hit, but not so badly, and started carrying Henry to an aid station. He said Henry was losing lots of blood. He said he died because the doctors had not landed as yet, and as a consequence, Henry died because of losing so much blood. Mousy said he'd done all he could with what he had, but it just was not enough. He said he's buried behind a Catholic church. He said he's sure of that because he buried him. Since his death, I've been having visions of him, so real that many of the times I would scream in my sleep and wake up. His last letter, dated the 5th of June, said he had received complete absolution and communion. So obviously they knew where they were going. His last letter was written in red ink. Maybe he was trying to tell me of what was going to happen. I didn't get...
Right. Now, a couple of points about that thing is, this is the letter where it's very moving. I don't want to spoil the fact it was a very moving letter. The first thing is, this is what John, the twin, has cobbled together from a guy, Mousy, who was in Charlie's unit, Henry's unit. I've never worked out exactly who Mousy was. He's saying there was no doctors there. Well, of course, there's medics. He's saying it's a combination of things he's pieced together. And of course, as John pieced together the story from Henry's buddies, they're not going to tell him everything they know. They're not going to say to him most of his face was missing. They're not going to say to him, it's a sanitized side of it, but it's the red ink, that bit about the letter there. Amazing. This is his grave marker, the temporary plate put on his temporary grave when he was at Hesfield. This is his bracelet, jump wings, what have you. And there's his grave. So Henry is buried back in the States. And yeah, amazing story. What can you say, eh? So Henry and Charlie died. Another guy, James Luce. Remember the guy with the wrist? I talked about him. James Luce, according to his individual deceased personnel file, died in the actual 326 hospital in Hiesville on June the 8th. Bob and Ken seem to remember that maybe 2 or 3 guys died in the church. Maybe he did die in the church. Maybe he was unconscious. But two men definitely died inside the church, and a third, James Luce, died after having been treated in the church. As far as we know, all the other 80 to 90 guys survived, at least survived that next few days. Doesn't mean they weren't necessarily killed in combat later on, but they survived Bob and Ken's treatment, which is testament to how brilliant they were at their jobs. We're kind of coming towards the end of things now, finally. Thanks for that. Those who haven't visited the church, what's remarkable about going there now, okay, there's the monuments there, and there's an information panel that tells the story, is that after the story, and there's still actually quite a bit to go, after the wounded were cleared out, they were moved off on the liberating force. I'll tell you about that in a minute. Come in on June the 7th. The wounded are taken off to a proper hospital. There's bandages everywhere. There's bits and pieces everywhere. There's ration boxes, all sorts of things lying there. Some of the French villagers try and kind of make an effort to clean up the church, and they kind of do a reasonably good job, but there's lots of things going on. There's buildings in disarray and rubble and stuff, and they miss cleaning up bits of some bloodstains. And there are still bloodstains on the wooden benches there. Now, people have sometimes questioned whether these are blood or not. They look like paint to me. Someone did a test. They took a little bit of dried blood, chipped it off, and when they did test it is definitely blood. So there are blood stains on these wooden benches of where some of these wounded men were laid out, which is just incredible. So this is, again, footage I took 2 days ago. People like Paul Clifford, Rich Riley, others who are watching this, who else is watching, who's I know has been there, Scott Grimm, Scott Grimm, have you been there, Scott? Paul Reed has been there, Jack Claridge, I know, has been there with me, I think. You've seen these bloodstains. If you haven't seen it there, this is your tangible reminder that this stuff actually happened. Sometimes when you're in Normandy, it's 77 years later, it's difficult to imagine these events were really actually took place. When you see bloodstains like there, it's like this stuff really happened. And it goes to show that these events actually took place here. So these are bloodstains. And so there we go. The church is still in use. It's not whatever the word is, declassified, but there's not a priest for it, dedicated priest now. The one priest covers about 7 or 8 villages. So there are weddings and funerals there, but there is not a regular Sunday mass there anymore. But it's still an active church, albeit not where that's the bloodstain I think is the most evocative. You see, it's really soaked in deep at the back there, and there's one there on the front there. Neil Morgan's been there as well. So I'm hoping those who have read the book, you're getting something new out of this. It's not just regurgitation of what's in the book. So these are the pews where these terrible events, these events unfolded here in this church. So hopefully you appreciate this live footage. Amazing stuff. I'll let that finish, and I'll get to the next bit of presentation. So we've got a little bit more to go. It's going to end up being 2 hours. This. Oh well. Whatever. Right. Next bit. Paul Lonza was one of the Lonza family who lived. I'll explain where they lived. They lived here in Odadville. So there's the Lonely Farm. Talked about that. Les Drury, their house on the corner. The father, Francois, worked in a factory in Carenton. The wife, Madeline, kind of stayed at home. They had loads of kids and quite impoverished. And DDay just erupts around them as it did for everybody else near here. And terrible, terrible day. This photo was taken on June the 4th. So 2 days before D-Day. Mary Madeleine, the 11-year-old girl. There's some other kids, some other families in there as well. But there's Mary Madeleine, Charles, Andre, and Paul. So Paul's there. Mary Madeleine, Andre, Charles. There's 5 and other kids there. Now, Mary Madeleine was doing her first communion that day, 11 years old. June the 4th, 2 days later. There's Francois, there's Madeleine, and there's Paul, who was also doing... he was part of the church mass. He was doing something, if he was an altar boy or something. So he was dressed in his Sunday best because he was helping doing whatever it was he was doing. 2 days later, everything just happens around them. And it just got really, really tragic. Now, in the fighting near Remember, this is the Georgian troops over here, Americans coming in. They're in the crossfire. They're in the right in the middle of everything. And these are houses made of wattle and daub, so cow shit and reeds, and no, not brick, not concrete, very thin walls. And bullets will penetrate through walls. Unfortunately, they're not bullets. It's not like the movies. A bullet came through the wall of the house on the morning of June the 6th and hit Mary Madeleine, the 11-year-old girl, had her first communion 2 days earlier, in the back of the head. She wasn't dead, but she was in a really bad way. And for the next few hours, there's fighting happening all around their house. And the poor parents are like, what do we do? Does one try and evacuate the girl somewhere? Where to? Where do you take an evacuated girl? Do they split up? Does the mother stay the kids? What terrible times. Some point late on the afternoon of June the 6th, probably when the Germans have actually moved up and taken over Angeville, there's a lull. And in the lull, they carry Mary Madeleine on a stretcher they've improvised out of whatever it is, wardrobe door or something, down to a farm nearby. And where other villages, this is not Angeville, this is in Haute-Adville, where other members of the family, somewhere over here, other villages have gathered, and overnight Mary Madeleine died. So that's one child has died. The next morning, it's the fighting starts again, and they're in the middle of a mortar shelling. And during the mortar shelling, Paul was 13, so he's the oldest kid, 13. And I guess at 13, he's old enough to kind of know that this is serious. If you're 6, like Charles was, and Andre, I think, was 7, it's all a big game. It's like fireworks. But if you're 13, you can remember the German occupation in 1940. You've probably seen people be, bombed. And during this bombardment, Paul just runs away from the mortars, runs off out of the house. Now, Francois, the father, is kind of trying to gather his other kids. They're crying. Where's Paul gone? It's all very hectic. Once he's gathered the kids, he goes off to try and find Paul. And Paul's just gone. He's in panic. He just shell shock, if you like, combat stress. After a couple of hours searching, Paul finds his son. And it's that moment, like if you're a parent, when you lose your kid in the supermarket, and when you see them again, you're both angry and relieved at the same time. That combination of feelings, because Paul knows his dad is angry with him for running away, but pleased that he's found me. So what the hell, what were you doing? Hugging him. And he kind of guides Paul back towards their house. On their way back to the house, they walk into a firefight. Francois gets killed by machine gun fire, but before dying, he kind of says to his son, look after your mother, or just like in a movie, or just a terrible drama. Paul goes off in a funk again. His dad's died now, and he kind of runs off somewhere. Now, what he didn't know is at some point, Mum, Madeleine, with the other kids, because Francois doesn't come back, Paul doesn't come back, doesn't know what to do. She's in this other person's house where Mary Madeleine had died. Also doesn't want to be sitting there with her 11-year-old daughter's body. So at some point, she moves the other kids back to their original home, their actual family home here near Haute-Adville. And at some point later in the story, Paul Lonza kind of comes out of his funk and arrives at the house, which is now in rubble. It has been absolutely hit by mortaring and shelling. I'll show you a couple of photos of what it was like. These are photos taken the following winter. This is snow. You can see the snow is 45. And there's the same view I took 2 days ago. The other reverse view, this is their house. Or in fact, it's a string of 3 houses. There are other people living there as well. And the same view. And Paul is sitting outside the rubble, this broken down house, when a GI finds him. This, I think, is sometime on the 7th of June. I don't know when. And this GI, maybe 101st, maybe engineers, whatever, takes Paul up to the church, which is kind of winding down. The Americans are, if they're not arrived yet and liberated, things are calming down. And probably Paul Lonza, the 13-year-old boy, was the last victim treated inside the church by Bob. He was small enough to be sat in the confessional box. Now, the tragedy is when Paul was sitting in front of that house there, because he couldn't go inside because it's rubble, inside, dead, were his mother and his other brothers and sisters. At some point when the mother had moved them back, they'd all been in there when it was hit by shelling. So Paul has just lost everybody. Mum, Dad, all his brothers and sisters. I'm getting a bit emotional now today. I haven't told this story for a long time. So he's orphaned and whatever losing your siblings is as well. And Paul, cutting the story very short, had a real struggle post-war with what we talked about a few days ago with Lee Mandel, combat stress, PTSD. You know, this kid has had a terrible war, terrible 2 days, basically. He does eventually find a good woman who kind of settles him down, and he marries and has kids, and has a reasonably good life. This is where they're listed on the monument in Saint-Combe-de-Mont, the Lonza family. So I had to recover myself now. I haven't told that story for such a long time. So Francois, Madeleine, Marie-Madeleine, Andre, Simone, and George. So one survivor. So liberation comes. Finally, we get some good news. So going back to how I'm explaining how the American positions work, the Americans arrived, tanks from the 746th Tank Battalion. E Company 506 are in fact the liberating force. I don't know whether you know anything about E Company 506. They had a couple of famous people in them. The guy Dick Winters, was it? I think Carwood Lipton. I believe a TV show was made about it. I don't know. It's a little known TV show. You may have heard of it. Band of something or other. Anyway, they were I'm being sarcastic. They were the unit that actually ended up liberating Angoville-au-Plain about early afternoon, June the 7th. And the Americans can move in towards the other force down near Odadville, where Colonel Ballard is. And after lots of trials and tribulations, the fighting there is over. This is a photo taken on probably that day, June the 7th or June the 8th. So there's across the farm that became Colonel Sink's head CP. This is a 30 caliber machine gun, probably on the back of a Jeep, I expect. And these men are now moving off towards Ballard's force in Odadville. It's the only wartime photo we have of Angoville-au-Plain that I've ever found so far. Well, there's one inside the church. I'll show you in a minute. Amazing photo. This is inside the church. Now, I didn't have this photo when I did the book, so it's not in the book. Don't look for it, but I've got it now. So it's a bonus if you have read it. This is inside. It isn't Bob and Ken. It would be so cool if that was Bob and Ken. There's that door you saw in the footage earlier on where they came in. You can see that the other, that's not the other bit there, the whatever, I forget what it's called now, and the cross, and the figure's still there. And you can see there's a carrying board there for medical facilities. There's the shell dressing bag. This is probably a take on June the 7th, June the 8th, something like that. I don't know. So the happy endings. So Bob and Ken received the Silver Star for their service in Angoville-au-Plain on June the 6th and 7th. There's Bob with his Silver Star, his jump wings. Now, in his in the church, he did have his reserve parachute silk. He had got it out of his pack and was using it. His main parachute got left in the field. His reserve parachute he dragged with him, and he was using it to try and keep the guys warm. Although, as I said earlier, silk isn't actually very insulating. But he had enough of the parachute after the event. He shoved it back in his bag, brought it back home, and he married his wife in a dress made of his D-Day parachute silk, which is a really cool story. Lovely. I love her. Who doesn't love a wedding photo? She Margaret, her name was, is wearing a dress made of parachute silk, which is just fantastic. So that's Bob Wright getting married. And then over the next few years, they both survived, or they both came back. This is Ken in the 60s. Both his sons went to Vietnam, both paratroopers, both came back. Mercer, good-looking family. California, he ran a service station for Esso, I think, in Sonoma County, where he lived for the rest of his life. The only photo of Bob and Ken I know of taken together after war at a reunion. They weren't actually as close a friends as people kind of make out. They knew each other, but they were very different personalities. Ken was very laid back, very Californian, probably, quite kind of liberal minded, had a kind of a little vineyard as well, a little kind of part hobby vineyard. Bob was very ambitious. He got electrical engineering degree, kind of was working for Homes for Habitat, the charity thing, did lots of work. And they kind of called each other up on their birthdays, saw each other at reunions, but they weren't like, they didn't go on holidays together. They were kind of like brothers that didn't always get on rather than best buddies, if that makes sense. But you can see the height difference there. Fantastic. Bob's, I think, first visit back to the church in 1990 something or other. Habitat for Humanity, that's the word I'm trying to think of there. Thank you, Lorelei. Bob with the Daniel, the mayor of Angeville, Daniel Omsham, with a painting of the church done. and this again would be in the 90s sometime at his 501st patch there. I never met Ken. I met Bob a number of times. Ken, all my correspondence with him was by email, telephone calls, and emails to his neighbors who would go and ask him questions on my behalf. That's Daniel, the mayor, meeting Ken on his first visit back. Now, this is to bring the story of Paul Lonza, the little boy, back to your consciousness. This is Bob and Paul. So Bob was 20 on D-Day. Paul was 13. When they get into their 70s and 80s, they're just both old men. And that is Bob holding Paul's grandson a number of years ago. So Paul, this boy who lost his family, did end up having a happy life. And although he and Bob couldn't speak each other's language, they had this connection of being in the same place at the same time. And when Bob went to ceremonies, he was proud of his purple heart, proud of his silver star, proud of his other decorations. It was his Red Cross armband he was more proud of, because he said my role was to be a medic. And so that's where he always pressed, wherever he stayed. He stayed at B&B in Hesfield, that was actually Maxwell Taylor's headquarters on D-Day. He would have the owner's iron flat, his Red Cross armband, every morning. So it was always neat and starched when he went out to a ceremony, which is something he always did. Bob, there's me and Bob. When I was fat, I was big guy then. That was back in 2000. I don't know when that was, 2003, 2004. I don't know. I can't remember now. All the years muddle up. My absolute favorite photo of Bob in front of his aid station. It's not actually great quality. I had a really crap camera back then. It doesn't blow up very well, but that is my all-time favorite photo of Bob. I just love it. Now, this is another moment. Now, remember I told you about Joachim Dams, that German machine gunner, the assistant machine gunner, who's behind the guy who went in the church. This is Joachim Dams telling Bob, I think in 2010 or something, I don't know, that I saw you on D-Day through that door. I saw you through there. And this is Joe Biley II, who passed away quite recently. His dad, Joe Biley, Jumping Joe, I Company 506, was a legend. Joe II, Vietnam veteran. He's a great loss to the historical 101st Airborne group of friends. Cheers to you, Joe. You're a good guy. But this is Joe there at the moment and you can see on Bob's face there, it's all coming back. You know, that moment of, because Joachim's basically saying, you know, my mate could have shot you. The Americans could have shot us. We were enemies then, but now we're here. We both survived this. We're here. And Bob is taking it all in there, I think. It's an amazing photo. Laurent Olivier there, Belgian historian and reenactor, who comes to lots of ceremonies. That's an amazing image. Here are the windows. There's others that I haven't got photos of. I just Paul Clifford, I haven't got a good photo of your window. I know you have, but I have never bothered to put one on my hard drive. But these are some of the windows that we've now set up there to honor the 101st. So the main one went in first, then there's the one to the 501st, one to the 101st, one to the 506th. They're pretty good. And then here's my footage of the actual memorial, or the memorials outside. So I haven't paid any video footage for a while I've been telling these stories. I'm probably forgotten to do some of that stuff, but I'm just checking my notes while I'm looking there. I think I've done most of what I said I was going to do. I had no idea it was going to be 2 hours, this. I was thinking, will it even last an hour? But it just started coming out once I started talking. So, yeah, and the monument does reference the life of a child saved. And whenever I do my tours, I always, as best I can with the time I have, tell a little bit about Paul Lonza's story. As Paul Reed is watching, it's so important to talk about the French civilian role in the invasion of Normandy, as it is the Italians in Italy. And I think here on World War II TV, we do a good job at talking about the civilians as well. I did the text for that information panel a few years ago. So I'll do questions if anyone has any in a minute. But of course, since I did the book, in fact, the year after it came out, both men died. So Kenneth J. More, 90 years old when he died in Sonoma. A lovely portrait. I love the look of wisdom on his face. Just that years of been there, done it, reflection, and a great photo of Bob, whatever year that was. So Bob died first, Ken died next. And basically that's it. I'm exhausted. I feel like I've run a marathon. For those of you who take tours to Angoville, and Paul Reed, you run Ledger, you bring tours here. I know the problem with Angoville is you're fitting it in, like all of us are, on a whole other things, and people go there, and it gets very busy as a location. Now you go there, there's other bus tours there. Sometimes people that you've got 15 minutes, 20 minutes there, and it's like, how much time do you devote to one story? Because there's Utah Beach to go to, there's Carenton, there's San Comodoro. I've managed to tell you and not even cleared half of my stories. I've done 2 hours on it. I still could tell you more about this. I do want to, just before we conclude, talk about something I didn't really put in the book, but because it's been a part of Medics Week, what these two guys carried with them as baggage over their years. Because Robert Wright, I think it was his last visit to the church, and I was there with him when he went in, was starting to think more about the men he'd lost, so Charlie Johnson and Henry Ostrowski, and was less thinking about the guys he'd saved. I talked about this with, I think, whoever I was talking to a couple of days. I think it might have been Neil. It might have been, who was it I was talking to? I don't know. But as he got older, he kept thinking about those that didn't make it. Now, a few years before he died, Bob was at some event somewhere. I don't know what. Charity event, something or other. And he was talking to a doctor, a real doctor, and he was talking about Angoville-au-Plain, and he talked about Charlie Johnson's injuries. And remember how Charlie had been hit in the back of the head, but he was talking lucidly. So this doctor seemed to know what it was that Charles, I don't know how, I'm not a medical man, but how you can diagnose someone in a 70-year-old story being told to you. But anyway, this guy said to Bob, "Oh, I expect if we got him to hospital, he'd have survived." It was probably, he told Bob what it was. Now that doctor, whoever it was, I don't know who it was. If you're watching it, and it was you should have just said to Bob, there was nothing you could do. But this doctor probably didn't know what he was doing, and he gave Bob the idea that there was something else Bob could have done to save this guy's life. Now remember, Bob's had 3 months training. He's 20 years old, but that, unfortunately, that kind of became like an earworm in his head. He got stuck with that idea about the fact he could have maybe saved Charlie Johnson. And luckily, and I'm saying luckily in an odd way, an ironic way, in the last couple of years of his life, Bob had quite bad, either it was dementia or Alzheimer's or a combination. He kind of began to forget the bad stuff and was kind of able to watch sport and enjoy meals and stuff. And I'm glad that he didn't die with that image, that thought in his head of the guy he could have saved. Ken Moore had a big regret. I didn't put this in the book either. Remember the two Germans who were in the church tower? It seems like 3 hours ago now. They were prisoners. So when Colonel Sink and the E Company 506 arrived, Ken, I don't know how he did it, he borrowed a Jeep or something. And he took the two German kids who'd been in the tower. They were 15 years old or something. He took them to the front line and said, head off that way towards Carenton. Try and link up with your buddies. We couldn't have done it without you. And a party on a handshake. He regretted that years later, because had he kept them prisoner, they survived. They're gonna survive the war. He thought he was doing the best thing by letting them return to their unit. Now, probably what happened, because that's what happened to a lot of the 6th Fallschirmjäger, they got killed. Either it wasn't the next day, next week, but in the next few weeks, they probably got killed because so many 6th Fallschirmjäger guys, although they probably were artillery spotters but attached to 6th Fallschirmjäger, probably got killed. Now, when I did the book, and again, if you haven't got it yet, Painting by Nigel Stewart, another tour guide, link is below. I'm plugging it again. I think I deserve it after 2 hours of talking. Right. I did put a plea out in a couple of German newspapers saying, does anybody know anything about two German veterans who are above a church in Normandy? I was very vague. I got nothing back. Now, maybe the right people didn't read this. I don't know. But the point is, we don't know who those two Germans were. And we'll probably never now find out who those two Germans were. Now, I wish we could put their names on a monument. Now, that probably is a bit too soon for Norway. We're into the idea of reconciliation, and there aren't monuments yet to Germans. But I think eventually, the spirit of this story is Bob and Ken treated people, whether they were friend or enemy, and they treated the civilians. If there were two German kids who came down and helped, and helped adjust tourniquets and stuff. Maybe they should be on the monument as well. Anyway, Ken regretted that he tried to save their lives, but probably in doing so ended up killing them in a ironic idea, if you see what I mean. Okay, so yeah, so that Phil Blood, that's my book there. When I get to Aachen to have a drink with you, Phil, one day, I'll bring you a copy of the book. So that's a couple of things about the aftermath of these two guys and what they dealt with. Bob got the Légion d'honneur by the French. Ken said he didn't want it. They both, in different ways, found the fame they acquired from this story a bit difficult to deal with. And if you've been coming to Normandy, like some of you have for years, and you've seen how big these events, I mean, Angoville-au-Plain, the annual event there back in the early 2000s, there was like 50 people there. By the last few years, hundreds there. And every veteran who turns up, if there are any, are mobbed by people, and everyone, you can't get near it anymore. And I love, on the one hand, that more people are aware of this story. On the other side of me likes it back in the day when less people knew about it, and it was more of an intimate story. And those who went there did it really well. They'd met Bob again. Now, unfortunately, not so much in COVID times, the buses come through there, and in they go. And it's look at the bloodstains. Not all of them. There are great tours. Ledger do great tours. There are other people. Mag's a guide. Duncan is a guide. Colin's a guide. There are people who do the story properly. But some people just go in and say, here's the bloodstains. Here's the windows. And they go off to the next stop. And it's like, yeah, you're just doing the kind of sensation. To me, if you're showing the bloodstains, like, yeah, I've shown you footage of the bloodstains, but as part of a presentation where I've talked about who was killed there and what happened to them, and Charlie Johnson and Frank and Henry Ostrowski, and Jörg's watching it. Jörg helped me out. Jörg gets a thank you in my book because Jörg took a couple of the photos. Swiss historian. I haven't seen you yet for ages, Jörg. So that's about all I'm going to say now. I thought I've got 2 hours now. I think that's about time to stop it. So that hopefully has given some interesting explanation about the story of Angoville-au-Plain and corrected some of the kind of the things that talked about incorrectly, and explained a little bit more, hopefully, about where the Allied positions were and the German positions were in the division, how it came to be that little pockets got isolated. So hopefully you found that interesting. So that's it. I'm going to go and have a beer now. In terms of what we've got coming up next week, Monday begins Battles at Sea Week. So we've got some great presentations. I haven't actually put them all online yet. I've got my schedule for the next 6 weeks worked out. I just haven't put them on YouTube yet. We've got Battles at Sea Week coming up, South Asia History Week, Disasters Week coming up, History Analyzed Week coming up. I will gradually get these all up online over the next few days and weeks as I get more time. But right now, that's gonna leave it at that, because it's coming up for the Wales game soon. So it's football. So there we go. If you, for those who have bought the book either because of this show or because you've been supporting World War II TV, thank you very much. And in terms of watching, don't forget, share what we're doing on social media. Consider becoming a patron. The link is there to the Patreon in the description below. As I say, if you haven't bought a book, buy a book. And I think that's it. Robert Wright, Kenneth More, two people who are deserving of all the attention they got, even if they themselves found it a bit uncomfortable to deal with this fame, as indeed some of the Easy Company veterans got. But that's another rabbit hole to go down. But there you are. I'm leaving it. 2 hours. So I'm good. I'm off to have a beer. Thank you everybody for watching. I will see you all next time. This is Paul Woodadge, World War II TV. Hopefully you've learned something about Angoville-au-Plain and the Angels of Mercy story. Brilliant. I'll see you all next time. Adios.